Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Partner Web Conference, Fast Track Dynamics 365 Commerce Tech Talk. Today's topic, how to extend Dynamics 365 Commerce. My name is Laura, and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the meeting today indicates your consent to being included in the meeting recording. Attendees may access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered by email within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenter or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. The presenter will be responding to your questions during and at the end of the presentation. Now, on to the presentation. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Sam Jerawan, Principal Program Manager. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. So as Laura mentioned, I'm a program manager on the Dynamics 365 Commerce team, and specifically, I own the e-commerce extensibility piece. So this presentation is right up my alley. I'm going to start off with a little overview of Dynamics 365 Commerce. We've had a rebranding recently, so I want to make sure you have a little background on that. And then we'll jump into the extensibility, and we'll talk about the developer requirements, and then jump into demos of building the main things that you can configure, which are modules, data actions, and themes. I won't be covering any Dynamics 365 Commerce retail server extensibility. That's been around a little while, and content hasn't changed there. So, and there's plenty available right now. So the agenda, as mentioned, I'll start off with a commerce overview. I then will give a overview of what we call the site builder tool. That's to build your e-commerce pages. And I also want to show you the preview site that you get when you have a preview environment. I'll then jump over to a little architecture overview and the developer tools that you'll need to set up. And finally, jump into setting up the SDK and then the demo of building modules, data actions, and themes. So for a commerce overview, if you're familiar with Dynamics 365 for retail, it's been rebranded to Dynamics 365 Commerce. The main difference, however, is now we have our own integrated e-commerce channel. So aside from having your point of sale channel, your call center channel, we now have e-commerce. Here on the next slide, I have a little bit of an architectural overview. The red arrows are the new touch points. So you'll see a new front end, web front end at the top, and that calls into a new CMS system. So as we build pages, I'll show you that in our site tool in a moment. As we build pages, those pages are stored in the CMS system. I won't be covering these surround apps, but they're new as well, and part of our offering, which is ratings and review service, as well as a recommendations engine. What you see here, if you get an evaluation environment, you'll end up with a demo data driven Fabricam fashion store. So at the right, you'll see some screenshots. I'll give a little overview of that in a moment as well. And this slide just covers some of the features. I'm not going to go into this in details, but you'll see, it talks about the native ratings and review service that is in there and a few other things. Then there is the authoring experience, so building these pages, and this is what I call the site builder tool. So I'll be walking through that. Pages are essentially built up of modules, so I want to give you a little overview before I jump into building a module. I won't be deep diving into any of the merchandising. Merchandising has really stayed the same. So if you already are using Dynamics 365 for retail, products are created the exact same way. We just have a new channel and they're surfaced through that online channel. There's also new platform capabilities. Our sites are provide privacy, compliance, and accessibility. All our modules out of the box are GDPR compliant and accessible compliant. Again, I won't go into too much details on this slide, but in general, that should give you a little overview of what we mean by Dynamics 365 Commerce. So let me now jump right into a little demo of the preview environment that you would get. Okay, so this is the Fabricam home page for the website, and it should look pretty familiar. It looks like a lot of other e-commerce sites out there. You'll have a nav bar at the top. Right here in the middle is what we call like a carousel, and it flips through different other marketing modules that we have in there. And then below that are quick links to get to the categories, a video, and all of these are just modules that are built up. In fact, we have a header up here. A header is a container module, and it contains other modules. The search box up here is a module. And to show you how a page like this is put together, let me now switch over to our site builder tool. So let me actually make sure I get to the root of this right here. So when I get to the Fabricam site, what I will end up seeing on the left are the things that I can perform here. So first of all is pages. So I can create new pages, and I can see all the existing pages right here. I can look through my existing products, and we have something called enriching a product page. I won't go into details there, but it allows you to, if you have certain products that you want to add additional marketing content to, you can do that from there. You can manage your URLs here. We also have a concept of templates and layouts. So when you build a new page, they have to be derived from a template. So the very first thing you generally do is create a brand new template if you're working on a site. And then we have something called fragments, and I'll show a fragment in a moment, but it essentially lets you have a group of modules pre-configured that you can drop on any page, and you can configure it from one spot. So generally our header and footers are created as modules, as fragments, and that way you can change it in one spot and it will get reflected on all the pages or templates that use that. And finally, we have a little section on site settings here. So let me jump into the home page here. I'll click on it. And what I get in the middle is a preview of my page. So as I make changes, they won't go live right away, but I will see them in my preview. On the left here, let me minimize this, is a tree view of my page. So notice there are these things called slots here. So here's a header slot. When you create container modules, you can create these different regions that are helpful for authoring. So there's a region here called the header slot where you usually put your header information. Then there's a then there's a main slot, and then there's a footer slot here. There's a few others here like the subheader and subfooter. The creator of this page chose these slots, and you can customize that as you need. So further within the main slot is a container module. This container module is a generic module that can contain other modules. And inside of that, I see a carousel module. That's the one that's flipping through down here. And if I open that, I can see there are 3 hero modules inside of that container module. And when I select an individual module at the far right side of my screen, in the rightmost column, I'll see a bunch of configurations for that. We call them configs. And so as I'm creating a module, you'll see where I create those. But for example, there's a config here for the module layout. And there's one choice in here, horizontal or none. There is a heading here, and I can change the heading and it'll show me in the preview. Or here, I'll just modify this slightly, and I can see the text inside my module changed as well. So this here is a rich text editor. There's also an image being used here, this hero1.jpg. When you specify a config for an image, the authoring tool knows to provide the image picker. So when I select this here, it'll let me pick from all the images that have been uploaded. In fact, we also have over on the left here, we have a media library where you can upload all your images. You can also use these images, the image library here, for your point of sale system. So again, just to review that quickly, in the authoring tool, we've got a page. It's made up of modules. Some modules are container modules that contain other modules, and you can configure the modules on the right-hand side. Since this data is stored in a CMS system, when you're done editing it, you can essentially check it in, and that's by clicking on this Finish Editing button right here. And then once you are and you can add a comment, and once you're done and ready, you can preview it from here, preview your live changes, but you can also publish it. So right now it's not live until I hit that publish button. All right, so back over to the PowerPoint. So the developer skill requirements are a more modern stack than you might see with retail. We're using React as a component, a JavaScript component library. We're also using JavaScript and TypeScript. as well as Node.js, which has something called NPM. That's our package management. I'll show you a little bit of that in action. And then lastly, for our theme development, we're using Sass. CSS. It's generally pronounced Sass, and that gets compiled down to CSS, just like TypeScript gets compiled down to JavaScript. So this is a very modern stack. They're all open source, and so you'll see a lot of big websites today like Facebook and Instagram using React. In fact, Facebook came out and owns the open source React library, and I think it's the biggest open source JavaScript library out there. So to install the tools, it's as simple as installing Node.js. There's also another tool that we use that runs on top of NPM. It's just called Yarn, and you'll see that in action as well. And then last, we need a source code editor. So we generally recommend Visual Studio Code. If you currently use the standard version of Visual Studio, that's fine as well. It's just a little slower when loading up, but it's perfectly fine to be running side by side. Now these tools you can install on your retail server dev VM if you want, but they also work great standalone. I run them on my laptop all the time, and they're very fast. You can have a dev environment set up within 5 to 10 minutes. The last slide I want to show before I jump into the demo is a general architecture. What this slide is showing, over on the left, you have a shopper who's hitting your website, and so an HTTP request comes in. So our Commerce Online platform will do the authentication because we support signed in or anonymous. Any kind of globalization, it'll determine if there's any locales in the website and which site to load. And in essence, what then happens is it's going to go to the CMS system and load really what's a series of JSON files that stitches them together. Once that JSON is ready, it gets sent over to our partner node container. This is where our Commerce Online SDK and runtime kick in. It'll examine the JSON file and figure out all the modules that make up the page. And so we have a list of modules, and then data actions are used to get data into a module. So we have a set of core data actions that we have built in that we'll call retail server. So for example, you'll see one called get product info or get simple products that'll return product information. And so data actions can either call retail server, they can call our new ratings and review service, or our recommendations engine. And then you'll also have a set of themes. So in our SDK, when you download it, you'll also get a starter kit. So the set of modules I just showed when I was on the Fabricam site, that set of modules is part of our starter kit. Those modules can either be extended, or if you want to completely change them and use them as a base, you can use a command we have called clone that will give you a copy of the module. Generally, it's generally better to extend them, and then as we service them, you'll pick up new updates to these modules. If you clone them and we service one, your clone won't get any changes that we made. And then finally, you'll have what I show on the right-hand side, the customizations, where you see module 1, 2. So any modules that you create, any data actions and themes, all of this will get packaged up when you run the command called pack, which I'll show a little later on as well. Packaged up and then uploaded as an extension to e-commerce through our tools, and I'll show that in that. Actually, I'll be showing some screenshots of that just because I won't have the time to do that. And again, on the right-hand side, we just show some of the technology we're using: React, MobX, Sass, and Node. All right, so I'm going to show you how to acquire the SDK. As I mentioned, it has the starter kit. It has a bunch of CLI commands like creating a module. There's a command to do that, or adding a theme, or packing, as I mentioned. There are some runtime APIs to do things like globalization and cookie management. And to get the SDK, you just go to our GitHub. And I'll show you how to get a better link to that in a second. Actually, it's the last one here. It's docs. I'm going to paste that into the window. Let me see, I think that's our second last slide. So I'll go back to that in 1 second. I'll just show you that to get the SDK, what you do is you clone the repo. So this is the repo that I show on this slide here. You clone it with that command, or you can go right to the link in GitHub and just download the zip file. Is another way. And then you navigate to the directory and then type in the yarn command. The yarn command will pull in the SDK. So really when you're cloning the repo, it's just the package configuration for the SDK. It hasn't really pulled it down yet. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to build a module that looks kind of like this. It's a featured product module. We have in this case, a shoe on the left, and then the product details on the right with a price. So let's jump right into code now. I'll minimize that. And the first place I want to start is going to docs.microsoft.com/Dynamics365 Commerce. And I'm going to paste this into our window. Okay, there we go. And there's one more thing I'm going to paste, which is our Yammer group. We highly recommend joining our Yammer group if you have a preview environment. That way, if you have any questions, we can jump on quite a few of our engineering staff monitor this. So I'm going to throw that in here as well. Actually, I think I'm linking right to the files, but that's all right. What I'm showing here is a file. I'm going to be walking through a guide, or part of a guide that I've created called Dynamics 365 E-commerce Developer Extensibility Getting Started Guide. So as you see me walking through a guide, that's where you guys can get it once you join the Yammer group. We also have a lot of this in our documentation. So what I'm going to do is in documentation, I'm quickly going to go down to development. And under development, I've got online channel extensibility. That's a new section we've added, and get started. And then here is a section called Setup Dev Environment. And this is something you can do even if you don't have our preview environment. You can start building modules today, in fact, if you'd like. So what this walks you through is installing the development environment, which starts off with Visual Studio Code, and then installing Node.js and installing Yarn. And that's all you really need to get going, plus our SDK, of course. And once you go to our GitHub, to actually get the SDK, if you click on the link here to clone or download, you could download the zip, but I like to clone, so I'm just going to copy the copy command. And to get that, I'm going to just create a directory here, cd repo, and then I'm going to type in git clone and then paste that in there. So that again is just getting our SDK package configuration. So it hasn't really pulled down anything yet besides that. So I'm now going to go into that directory. There we go. And there's some files in here. And I'm going to type in the word yarn. This is running on top of NPM, which is part of Node. And this is just a standard way to pull down all my dependency packages. So I already have Yarn and Node and Visual Studio Code installed on this machine. And so let me open up a new instance of Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to be asked which folder would I like to view. So I'm going to pick a folder, that new one we just opened or created. And by the way, while it's running, it'll take about 2 to 3 minutes to pull down all the dependencies. I will go in here and show you a few of the files that got pulled down with it. Okay, so the most important directory that you'll care about is this source directory. And over here, I can see it finished. So I'm going to close that down. I'm also going to, before I walk you through those files, in the Visual Studio Code is a neat thing where you can pull up a terminal window. And so I'm going to open that up. Sometimes you might see a PowerShell in here, but you can just change the default shell with command prompt, and then you can open new ones. And it opens right into the directory. To run the Node server to test everything out, I'm going to type in yarn start, and that will run my Node server. When that's done, it'll tell me what port it's running on. And it's going to be port 4000. And I know that because of this environment file here. If you make any changes to the environment file, you have to restart your Node server down here. But notice up here the two properties that are set. One is the app type, and that's always going to be partner, and then the port. So if you need a different port than 4000, then this is where you can change it. Also, later as I'm going on, we'll want to change this base URL. So if I am developing and I want to hit my live retail server, I can do that by providing my URL here, and I can pull in live data. And I'll show you that in action as well. Along with the live server, I'll need my channel ID, catalog ID, and OUN. E-commerce only supports catalog ID of 0, so that one's always going to be 0. These hashes are just mean mean that this is commented out right now. And now under the source directory, while this is the first time you build your code, this takes a little bit longer. And what's happening is all the TypeScript is getting compiled. All my theme Sass files are being compiled into CSS, and TypeScript's getting compiled down to JavaScript. But this is the most important directory is source. This is where you're going to create any extensible pieces like modules, like themes, and you can see directories for those, and also data actions. So if I open this here, we actually have a module here called Hello World. So notice here it said port 4000. So I'm ready to go. My server's running, and I'm going to go ahead and type in https://localhost 4000. And to make sure everything's working, I can hit version. And that, first of all, because I'm using HTTPS, it's mentioning that my cert isn't valid. That's okay. I'll continue. And there I go. I'm seeing a bunch of versions of my installed components. So now I know my node server is running. I'm going to change this to another API called, or a URL called SDK/all modules. And this gives me a list of all the modules I currently have. So notice all these modules, these are all part of that starter kit I mentioned. So I can click on any module like Hero, and it's using mock data right now to give me this data, because when you configure the Hero module on a live page, it's stored in the CMS system. But right now on a local environment, I'm not talking to the CMS system. I'm just talking to my local system. So we have mock data, and I'll show you how you integrate that into your own module here. And if I hit back here, if you recall, our SDK installed one module called Hello World. So I should be able to find that module in here. Gee, I think it might be categorized. Here it is down here, Hello World. And pretty basic. It's not doing much at all. But that's, yeah, I'm going to show you how to create a module next. Okay, so to create a module, I'm going to escape out of that yarn start, and I'm going to type in a command yarn msdyn 365, and I'll have a command add module. Now, if I quickly go back to my documentation, I'll just show you that here is a CLI command reference, and here you can see those commands. So here is one called add data action and add module. This is the one I'm using now. And so you'll see them all prepended with yarn msdyn 365, and then you'll see the CLI command right here. And then this one requires a module name. So let's give this a module name, and I'll call this sample module. Okay, so notice in here, I now have Hello World and sample module, and I have a few files. I'll show you those files in just a moment, but I do want to show you, actually what I'm going to do right now is I have another Visual Studio Code opened where I've pre-configured a couple of things. So let me go ahead and close this. I've showed you how to create a module. And I've got one already created over here called product feature. It's empty right now as well. I haven't modified it. But what I did add over here that I didn't in the other one is I did set my environment variable to point to one of my test environments. So this is a retail server, and I have a channel in there created, an online channel. That's the channel ID and an OUN for it. So this is the information I needed to get for my local machine, or not my test environment that I'm hitting against. So now that I have that and I have a module in here, let me open up a new terminal window. I'll run yarn start again. And while that's starting up, let me show you the files that make up a module. So the first and most important one is this definition file here. This provides all the metadata for the authoring tools. So in the authoring tools, I didn't quite show it, but if I was to add a new module under here, for example, actually I need to edit the file first, I'll get a module picker. And notice here it's letting me pick a feature or a hero module, and it's got the name and description and categories. So that metadata comes directly from the module definition file. So there you can see the friendly name, the description, the categories, and below that is the data action section. You'll see this in action a little later. This is where you declare the data actions that are going to run on the server. Next is the config section. So here you can see a config called title. and it's of type string. So if I was to deploy this module now, package, and I would end up, if I go back over here, I would end up with my module with one new string property called title over here, and then there's a description as well. And I'll show that in action as well. And then lastly, I won't be going into details here, but if you have any resources in your module that need to be localized, you can add keys here, and then you can include localized files for those. Probably the next most important file, or actually before I jump to that one, I'll jump to one more thing. So I mentioned earlier mock files. So when I create different configs here, I need some value that I can test with. So that's where the mocks directory comes in. And we have a product feature.json here. And notice under this config section, I've got a title. So this title matches the one right here, title. And then its value is example config value. And again, I'll show that a little more in action. And then this data file, whenever I use a data action and it's run, I need to declare a variable for the data that comes back from the data action to be stored. And that is in this data file. And then the last two files are actually my React component itself. So this is a React component, and it has a separated view. So I have a view file, which renders my HTML. And the React component, its job is to create a props. A props is just a short form for properties. So it's creating a props object here, and then calling my view on it. And then so within my view, any data that gets passed in, so here I can see props. This is just short form. So instead of saying props.title, I can short form it. So you can see the title is being passed in and the resource sample in this example. So let me show you that in action. So I will load up my localhost module. Now the module name I gave it was product feature. So here we go. Here you can see config value, example config value. And let me now show you, if I change the mock for this to be, I'll just have a little world up here, and I'll save this file. Now notice it detects saved files and it compiles it for me. And then if I refresh this page, there we go, it picked up my change. So as you're doing development on your local box, that's how you can quickly iterate on your module development. Okay, so that gives you hopefully a good overview of this. So let's start building a real module. This is where my Word document is going to come in. I have a bunch of cut and paste code in here. So if you do end up getting this document here, you'll see we're going to, again, I think I showed this in my slide deck, we're going to build a module that looks like this. And this walks through setting up your dev environment, just as I showed you through our documentation. This is kind of a step-by-step guide. And this talks a little bit about that env file and the changes you'd want to make there, and where you can get those values from the Dynamics retail headquarters or commerce headquarters. And then I showed you port 4000 and all modules. So we've reviewed all that. And the last thing we did was creating that new module. So I already created that module, product feature. Now the next section here, I kind of walk through what those files are. The next section where I want to actually get code to copy out of here. Sorry, bear with me a second. Okay, designing our module. So what I'm going to start out with, I want a module that will have an option, a config, to switch the image from the left to the right side. And I'm going to start off now with a module that is just statically built. So notice here in my React component, I just have some strings, some product, some constants, product name, the info, and it's just hard coded here. So I will just copy this file. I just find if I copy the whole thing and paste it, it's a lot easier than just the highlighted parts, less chance of error on my part. So I'll go into my product feature file here, and I'll replace that. Okay, and I'm going to save it. And again, notice it's recompiling at the bottom. And then I'm also going to change my view. So now that I'm going to pass in the product name, the info, image, price, and button info through the props. So that's getting passed into my view. And now I'm going to generate some HTML based on that. So I'm going to have a two divs, a parent div, and then two divs inside of it with columns. Now, one thing I want to call out is this class name equals call dash sm dash 6. This is a bootstrap class name. So if you're familiar or not familiar with Bootstrap, it is another open source UI JavaScript library, and it provides a lot of components. Our starter kit uses Bootstrap. However, we don't dictate that you stick to it. It's just really handy to have. Has kind of responsive design built in, and I'll show you that in action. But by putting these two class names in divs, what this is saying is Bootstrap actually has a 12 grid system, like 12 grid across. And this is basically saying, hey, use up 6 of those grid items for the first column, and then use up the other 6 for the second column. So what I expect is 2 columns that are side by side using the exact same width. So I'll copy this code over, and into my view file, I'll paste that. Save that. Okay, so let's see what our module looks like now. There we go. But I kind of said we're supposed to have 2 columns, right? It looks like rows. So the reason that is happening is, although I've declared Bootstrap classes here, I haven't actually told my module here to use Bootstrap yet. So that's where themes come in. So the one extra thing I did was you'll when you install the SDK, you'll see a default theme in here. I also created a new one. There's another CLI command, add theme, which you can use to create a theme. And I created a theme called Spring Theme here. Themes are created very similarly to modules in that there's a definition file, but there's not as much information here because we don't have configs, for example, in here. So you'll see the friendly name and the actual name of the theme here. The important file inside of my theme is under the styles directory for my CSS. So by default, you get a SAS file here. So notice the name. It follows a pattern. The name of my theme.theme.scss. And in here, I've just added 2 really basic items here. One is to tell it to use Font Awesome, which is an open source font library. And second is to use Bootstrap. So by having these 2 lines here, or actually just the Bootstrap one, is the one that's going to give me Bootstrap. So since I've already have that in there, to leverage that theme, all I have to do is add a theme argument equals and the name of my theme. So that one was called Spring Theme. And there we go. Now it's picked up Bootstrap. I know because I have 2 columns. And I told you, with Bootstrap, you get a responsive design. So as I start shrinking this page down, you'll see the 2 columns collapse eventually into 1. There's certain breakpoints you can define. And so that's what's happening there. So you get that for free with Bootstrap. So when you have a mobile view of your site, you don't have to do so much work on your modules for that. Okay, so the one other thing with themes, I'm not going to go into detail, but I do want to cover is that you might want to modify one of our existing starter kit modules. And I'm just going to open up a directory here to show you under the SDK directory, there's a node modules, and you can see the modules. You can see the modules in this directory here. So for example, you see the buy box, carousel, and whatnot. Also, the module list you see might be different depending on the version of the starter kit. We're about to release a new one, so it might be a little bit different than what you see here. But if you were to go into one of these, you could actually see the source code for these. And if you want to copy the code and use it for something else, you can do that. But if you go into one of these, you'll also see the TSX, the view file in here. So here's loyalty view. What we allow you to do is override the view, or we call it view extensibility. So under this views directory, I can create a new view and change the layout. I can even add different CSS under styles for each module. They all have defined classes, so I can override the styles and the themes, and I can make the built-in starter kit theme modules look and feel quite different if I want to. So depending on the theme you choose, you can have your sites lay out quite differently. So that's what you do under the views. We also allow you to extend the definitions. That's what we use the definition extension directory. And again, if you want to add another config setting, for example, to one of the starter kit modules, you can do that here. Not only can you do that to the starter kit modules, but you can also do these to your own modules. Okay, so that's probably all I'm going to cover on themes, except there is one little piece I realized I did not show is in our authoring tools. To change a theme, there are 3 places you can change a theme. One is at the site level. So if I click on settings down here and go to extensions, I'll see a drop down here that shows me the default theme for my whole site. So this one is currently set to Fabricam. So that will be the default theme. But when I'm building templates and pages, templates, for example, I'll pick one here. So I'll pick general content template. I can also pick the theme for that template. So any page that derives off the theme could have, off the template could have that different theme. So on the default page here, I can see a theme drop down here. And so it's not editable at the moment just because I don't have this edited, but if I edit it, then I can pick a different theme. So that's how themes work. And then lastly, for pages, you can do the same thing. You can go to a single page and I can say, hey, I just want this to have a theme. Maybe there's a marketing campaign theme that you only want select pages to have that on. So that's how that works. Okay, so let's start building out our module a little more. So what I want to do now is add a config to it. So to do that, I'll just skip to our next little chapter in here. To do that, again, a theme. We're going to add a theme like this module layout with a choice. There's going to be 2 choices in it, left or right, but it's actually not going to be module layout. Sorry, it's going to be the image layout. And to do that, I am going to add a new config. So you see this section here, config. This is going to be the name of my config, image alignment, but the friendly name is going to be image alignment, and there's going to be a description here. This is a text, but it's also going to be an enumerator, and it's going to limit it to left and right. So in the authoring tools, like I show here, you would get a drop down, and there will only be 2 options, left and right. So I'm going to copy this whole thing here and replace our definition file. So I'll go to definitions, replace that. Now, remember I talked about mocks. Well, I need some value for this initially to be set. There's a default here, but this default is used for the authoring tool, so that won't be the default that's set. So in my mock file, if I go back there, you'll notice previously there was a property called title. I've gotten rid of that, and I'm going to replace that. So now I have image alignment, and the value is going to be left. Okay, so the last thing I have left to do is leverage that property from within my React component. So I will go back to my Word document and get the piece I need. And notice the highlight changes I'm going to do. So notice this one here, there's a little bit of magic happening, and this auto-generated file is kind of the glue that allows the magic. So notice we defined a new property called image alignment. Well, I need to use that property in my React component. So what we have is we have this auto-generated file, and notice it automatically added on this interface, iProduct feature config, it added that property that I added here. It's of type image alignment, and it added an enum for me. And so that's the magic. And then in my view file, that's at the top here, that is already being imported in. So to leverage the new property, the enum out of it, I need to specify that I want to use it up here. And then I'm going to also do a shortcut to get the config out of there and then pass in the image alignment to my view. So all I'm doing is passing in that property. So let me copy this section here. There we go, save that file. And then last is the actual view. I need to do a little bit of change here to determine if the value is left or right. So I have a little if statement here. So this is my essentially my render method here. And I've broken up my HTML to now have a left section and a right. And I basically I have 2 helper functions up here, one called a render image and one called render info, and that's just going to return the image HTML, and the other one's going to return the HTML needed for the product name, info, and price. And then basically I'll figure out if the alignment is set to left or right, and then I'll create 2 variables left and right. So that's what's going on there. Okay, so I'll save that, wait for the build to happen, and then let's go refresh our module and see what we got. Okay, so I'm going to refresh, and well, I think it worked. It looks the same though. That's because we didn't change any text. So, or we didn't change much at all, in fact. If I go back now to Visual Studio, let me go to the mock file and change this image alignment to right. Let's see if things work. If it picks it up. So built, go back here, refresh, and yay, it worked. So there we go. That's our first config. If I was, again, to upload this module now, I'll have one config on this module in my authoring on the Site Builder tool. All right, so next, what I want to do, the next section, that Word doc, has us taking all of that static text, so this text that you see right here, and we're going to make those configs as well so that the module, the page author can configure that data if they like. So to do that, as I've been doing, I'm just going to cut and paste some code. So notice here, I'm going to add a product title. It's going to be string. I'm going to add a details. It's going to be rich text. I'm going to add an image. And also a button. So to do that, I'll just grab all of this. And I'll go to my definition file, save it, and then I'll go again with mocks. I want to add some mock data for that. And I'll add some mock data. So everything is moved here. And then last, I need to pass in, or I need to make sure I get that information from the config file and not the hard-coded text that I previously had. So I just make sure there's a value there. If there's a value there, use it. Otherwise, just specify that nothing, no data was defined. So I'll just last copy this file. I don't have to change my view because I'm not going to lay things out any different. Okay, save that. And I think that's the last. And then I will go update. There we go, it's done. I'll refresh. And again, I copied the same text, so I don't know if it truly is working or not. So to test that, I'll go back to my mock file and I will I'll throw a few characters in here just to see, and then save that. And then if all works out, refresh my page, and there we go. You can see the AAs and the BBs. So that's great. So we've now managed to add configs for all of my properties that my module needs. Okay, so next step is, that's great for a marketing module, but what if I want my module to show real data coming from our retail server? Okay, so that is where data actions come in. We have a bunch of built-in data actions. So if I go to the SDK directory and under node modules here, there is a retail actions directory. And if I go dist lib, I'll see all of the actions in here. So if you're familiar with some of the retail APIs that we provide, you'll see some here. So like as you're checking out, we have one for checkout. We have one for getting the list of categories. That's handy if you're building certain modules for navigating different categories. We have one called Get Simple Products. That's the one I'm going to be using. I want to get product information. So here I can look at the JS file. Now, if I want to customize these, I can create my own data actions and I can get the source code from here and use these as examples. So to call a data action, what I need to do is add a data action declaration into this section right here in my definition file. Whenever you add a new data action, you actually have to, that's only read at startup, so I have to stop my node server down here. So I hit Control C to break out of there. And to add my data action, again, just so I don't make a mistake, I'm going to just copy this section here. Notice the path was the same path I just showed you guys, the dist lib, and then this is pointing to that data action. And then there's a run at, and there's two options for this. There's run at server. So when the page is loaded on the server side, this page, all the data actions are called, and then there's a client. Client is handy if you want to debug and you want to see you're using some developer tools to see the calls, and you can see that call going through. So I'll replace this, and now I'll go back here. I want to show you one more thing, is that to actually get product information, I do want to provide another config to get the product. This API, get simple products, will take in a comma delimited list of products, but in this case, I'm just going to have a single one. So here you can see I'm asking for a product ID. Again, as we've been talking with mocks, I need to grab a mock for that. And this is an actual product ID from my retail server. And so I'm going to go ahead and use that. So open my mock file. And there you can see the new product ID here. Make sure I save these files. And then last is, I mentioned this earlier, but in case you didn't catch it, whenever a data action is called, you need to have the return data come back in the data file here. So notice the products here, and it's of type simple product. If I hit F12 on that, I'll actually see what the product is going to return. So I can see it's going to return a name, a description, a base price, a price. So these are all this is all the data that I can use within my module if I want. And so this again is just, we have a retail proxy that we've already provided. And so those types are already provided in here out of the box. And so I'm going to save this file here. So far, just a quick recap here. We've added the call to a data action inside of the definition file, and we've added the return variable here. Notice this products will match the name of this data action here. That's how they get mapped together. And we added mocks for that as well. The last thing we have to do is do something with that data that comes back. So I will go back to my Word document here. And now I'm going to pass, I'm going to be using the products object that comes back. That's the one we just defined in our data file. Let me copy this. And I'm going to, you see that big yellow section right here. I'm checking to see if a product, at least one product came back. So you can see this section here. So even though I'm setting the title and details from my config, I'm also then checking to see if one was returned. I just override it just for demo sakes here. So you can see the product name, info, URL. So let's go back here, paste that, save it. Now I'm going to run yarn start. And that'll take about a minute to start up. Okay, and so one important thing I want to just reiterate too is this will only work if you have a retail server configured in your env file. So again, I have this. Now, if you don't, that's okay. You can still build a mock against this. I won't cover it here, but when you do get the file, when you do get the document, you'll see a section here for mocking your core data actions. And all you have to do is build a new file called, actually you can name it whatever you like, but it has to be .action mock.json. And then you can paste in, remember the structure I showed you for simple products? You just have to fill in that value. So the mock file ends up looking like this. There's a cache object that matches the data action, and then the mock data here. So it'll use that data instead. And then in your URL, you just specify which mock file you're using. So if you're building against a live retail server, you can get the information live, as I mentioned, or not. Okay, so let's see if that worked. I'll refresh this. And great. So I see now I have a shoe, and in fact, if I go back to my let's see, I'll just pick a different product here. I'll pick a watch here. If I go onto this page, at the very top here, I can get the product ID. So I'm going to grab this one. So it's a watch. And then if I go to my mock file here, change this, I should pick up the new product here. There, yay, okay. So that's showing you it's coming from our live server. So the last thing I want to show here is how do you package this up and upload it to your site. So you just type yarn msdyn 365 and pack. This will take about 3 or 4 minutes. It does a full build of everything. We only upload everything as a single package. So you go pack. It's going to create a zip file. Whoops, I had an extra in there. So that's going to pack it. And again, in my Word file, I'll just show you what the page looks like. By the way, if you want to clone a module, I mentioned that there's a API called clone, and you provide the name of the module you're cloning and then the new name. Again, I generally try to discourage cloning if at all possible, and instead using our Vue extensions. And I covered creating a theme, so I have a section here on theme. I'm going to just get past the theme section here. And the next section after this, after the themes, is deploying through LCS. So I just ran this command here, yarn msdyn 365 pack. What you do after that is you load your LCS site, select the project you want to upload this to, and then it's actually the same as if you were deploying a retail extension. There's an assets library on the right-hand side. You upload it. Actually, there's a new asset library in here called e-commerce package. You would upload that in here. That takes about an hour. It does a full validation of all the modules in there and everything, and then let's see. Once that's uploaded, you then deploy it. You pick the environment you want to deploy to. So you might want to deploy to a sandbox first, and then you deploy to an environment. You hit manage. Again, this is very similar to deploying a retail extension. And then there's a new tab here, e-commerce, and you'll see apply extension there. And then this takes a little bit of time. It takes about an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours, in total about 3 hours. So you're not going to be uploading that often. When you're doing development, you're generally doing it locally. There's some tips and tricks here as well. If you want to dev against your live site, you can have your local node render your live site. So once you've uploaded your module once, maybe early development phase, you can build pages with it and then debug them locally. Or you can even create what we call page mocks. So this doc has a lot more information on doing that. So I see we've got about 9 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to some Q&A. So let's see, Rob, Andreas, is there any questions you guys, or themes of questions that came in that we can help answer?
So there was one question around what is the current commerce is very much B2C. Is there a plan for B2B in the near future?
Yeah, great question. It is definitely in our roadmap. It's a question we've heard quite a bit from our customers. I can't speak to any of the features in it. I'm not. It's so broad across our whole product, so I'm not 100% sure. But you'll definitely be seeing more of that coming out. I just can't give any specifics there, unfortunately. How about anything else?
That's it for questions.
That was it for questions. Okay. Let's see. I do have a few more minutes, so let me take a few more minutes and show you just a couple more things in action then, and then we'll pass it off to Laura to close. So yeah, I'll probably grab another 5 minutes. So if I go, I do want to show you, I wouldn't mind showing you the mock file that I had up here. So let me get back to that section a little bit lower here. Okay, so the last thing we just did was created we used a platform data action, and now I want to create a mock for it. Maybe searching will be a little faster. Okay, mocking core data actions. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to create a file with this name here. So I'll go back here, and under my mocks, I'll just create a brand new file with that name, JSON, and then I will copy the contents that I have here. Show you how easy it is to create a mock. Okay, so I've created my mock file. Oh, I need to kickstart yarn again. And you can see down here, by the way, the zip file was created, the package, which is right here. And so I'll hit yarn, start here. That. We'll let that kick off. So what I should end up seeing here in my mock, I've got some text for the name is retro horn rimmed glasses. I've got a URL that I'm just pointing to for the image. So if everything works out, using this URL now, I'll now be talking to this. So again, point here is if you don't have a retail server that you're working against, you can fully build out all your modules just mocking the data. Okay, it looks like it's done. And I'll paste in the new URL. Whoops. Okay, and there we go. There's our mock file. So there's two ways to get that data in here. Since I've got, let's see, in the last minute, right under this section, I do want to show you how to create your own data action. So I can do that pretty quick. Okay, once you've uploaded it, I show. Okay, so creating a custom, so you might want to call your own service. You can also call any of our, I also have sections here to call your own, to call any of our retail APIs. If we don't have a data action for it, you can still call any of the retail APIs or retail extensions for that matter. So if I go back to Visual Studio here and escape out of here, I'm going to create a new data action. So notice I'm saying add data action, get product reviews, and notice underneath actions, a new file was created. So TS file, and to use that data action, similar to how I used the other data action earlier, in my definition file, I just need to add and this is a relative path now because it's my local one, a call to that API. So I'm going to go back here and under my definition file, data actions, and formatting there, save it. And the last thing I want to do is I do have the data action I'm using here is just calling an open source JSON sample site. So what it's going to do is just pass back some JSON. So I'm going to paste this in, save it. Then the last thing I need to do is, since I have that coming back, so I have this, remember I need in my data file, I need to have that product reviews. So I'm going to add a new variable in my data file. There we go, it's called product reviews. And then I need to do something with that data. So I'm going to, let's see here. Whoops, this is actually my data action here. I think I pasted the wrong file up here, my data action. I pasted the default that already comes in. And then this is my React file. I'm saying, hey, I now have reviews, pass that through to my view. And lastly is my view. I want to add that data. So I'm going to change my div a little bit, my HTML, to actually just dump out the blob of JSON that comes back. So I'll go ahead and paste that in. And then one quick yarn start, and then I should be able to show you that in action. And then we'll hand off, I think with a minute left, I'll hand that back to Laura. Hopefully I didn't make a cut and paste mistake. Also, when you're using Visual Studio Code, one handy thing is whenever you make a change to a file, a little black dot appears there. So forever am I forgetting to save my files. So that's a good reminder that I missed saving a file. So if something's not working as expected, glance up there. It's usually helpful. I think it's almost done. There we go. Okay. Refresh this. There we go. So there's a big blob that came back, and that came back from, I didn't really show you, but in the get product reviews, there's a simple API call right here to a third-party service here. So that is it. That covers, we covered building a module, setting up your dev environment, building a module, adding configs to modules, calling a platform data action, building your own data action, creating a theme and using a theme. There's a few more topics that I cover in that Word doc if you're able to get it, or in our regular documentation has that as well. So Laura, with about 1 minute left, I pass it back to you. Thank you, folks.
Great, thanks, Sam. I've posted a link in the Q&A panel just a couple minutes ago. This is a link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. Our event production team strives to be a leader in delivering online content, and we ask that you please help us reach this goal by providing some feedback for us. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can improve events, or would like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. We do appreciate the time you take to do this, and thank you for your support. This concludes today's web conference. The recording and a copy of the presentation deck will be available within 5 business days. Please look for an email from Worldwide Learning that will include details on how to access them. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Sam Jarwan, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today. Goodbye.